Are institutions gendered? Most of us think about gender as an individual trait or an identity. But what about social institutions, like schools, or the workplace, or traditionally male professions, like the law or the military? Are institutions themselves gendered? This is a question that I think about a lot. For most of our nation's history, courts upheld state laws that discriminated against women because of their gender. Many states passed laws that restricted women from the right to vote, or the right to sit on juries, or the right to join occupations reserved for men. In one famous case, a state Supreme Court upheld a state law that barred women from the practice of law. The court agreed that women were too fragile and emotional to represent clients in the rough and tumble of a courtroom. I grew up in the 1970s, and during that time, the US Supreme Court began to change the way it thought about gender discrimination. The court took aim against gender stereotypes, mistaken beliefs about men and women. I watched as the court held that states could no longer deny women the same opportunities they offered men because of outdated and overly broad generalizations about the way men and women are. I grew up and I became a lawyer. I began to work at a prominent law firm in New York City, something that was not possible for women the generation before me. The court had aimed against stereotyping. Doors swung open. But when I looked inside the law firm, I saw that the partners were mostly men. 30 years later, they still are. In 1992, I began to represent 5 female clients in a major lawsuit that changed the way I thought about gender equality. That lawsuit challenged the males-only admission policy of the Citadel, the state military college of South Carolina. During the course of that litigation, I began to ask the question, are institutions themselves gendered? The answer is yes, particularly for those institutions that have traditionally excluded women. Sociologist Joan Acker has written, institutions have gendered assumptions and practices that are embedded in the institutions themselves. For these gendered institutions, it's not enough to simply open the doors. The institutions themselves must change to include women. And that is what I would like to talk about tonight. In 1992, I jumped at the opportunity to represent 3 female Navy veterans. They had sued the Citadel, seeking admission to its veterans program. How many of you have heard of the Citadel? Well, at the time I started this suit, I lived in New York City, and I didn't know as much about the Citadel as I needed to, nor the place it occupied in South Carolina. The Citadel is a state college, just like the University of Tennessee. Its undergraduate program, though, is structured in a military style, like West Point. Its students are cadets, they wear uniforms, they live in barracks, and they're subject to a system of discipline and chain of command that's run by other students. For 154 years, the Citadel excluded women, reserving its benefits for South Carolina's sons, but not its daughters. My female veteran clients had served the country during the First Gulf War, and returning home, they tried to enroll in the Citadel's Veterans Program, a program open to men. The Citadel refused them admission. In court, the Citadel argued that it offered a single-gender education, part of South Carolina's diverse range of higher education. Its legal defense was based on traditional gender stereotypes. Men and women, it argued, are fundamentally different. Men require stress and adversity. They flourish in the military style offered at the Citadel. The Citadel said women do not. Women flourish in a kinder and gentler form of education. If admitted, they would suffer harm. Rather than admit women, the Citadel supported the creation of a deliberately separate and unequal program, a non-military leadership program at a private women's college. One of its leading educational experts testified that women were like a toxic kind of virus whose admission would require changes that ultimately would destroy the institution. When I began the case, I thought it was straightforward and easy to win. The Supreme Court had ruled in a similar case that the state of Mississippi could not exclude men from its all-female nursing college. That would reproduce gender stereotypes. I saw the Citadel case as the mirror image of the Mississippi case. South Carolina could not exclude women from a military college based on traditional stereotypes. I was convinced we would win the case in 3 months' time. It turned out I was completely wrong. Shortly after we began to represent the veterans, the Citadel closed its veterans program. It announced we have achieved equal protection. Neither men nor women can attend the Citadel. And it threw out some 78 male veterans who had enrolled that semester. What I thought would be an easy case had morphed into a gender war. I found myself in Charleston, South Carolina, researching cases involving the civil rights era, when cities and states closed public schools or pools rather than desegregate. The Citadel mounted a similar scorched earth policy to keep women out. After the program was closed, another young woman stepped forward to join the lawsuit. Her name was Shannon Faulkner, and she was an 18-year-old high school senior from Powdersville, South Carolina. Shannon was a model student. She was in the National Honor Society, she played varsity softball, and she marched in the school's band. She applied for admission, and in 10 days' time, the Citadel admitted her, thinking she was male. When it discovered she was female, it immediately rescinded its offer. Shannon was proud to stand beside her. Citadel supporters, though, quickly targeted her. I came to realize that the Citadel was not merely a state college. It was a powerful and traditional institution in South Carolina. Founded in 1842, the Citadel bragged that its cadets had fired the opening shots in the Civil War. It excluded black males until the mid-70s. In South Carolina, the Citadel offered its male graduates access to a powerful alumni network. At the time of our lawsuit, the Citadel alums included a U.S. Senator, 2 former governors of South Carolina, and a host of local and state politicians, businessmen, and decorated military generals. Shannon's lawsuit fundamentally challenged this all-male institution. and Citadel alumni took aim. Citadel alumni helped raise millions of dollars to keep the Citadel all male. They sold t-shirts that featured the school's mascot, the bulldog. On the front of the t-shirt, it read, 1,852 bulldogs, the number of male cadets. And on the back, it read, and one bitch, featuring a female bulldog with red lipstick. On campus, Citadel cadets yelled epithets at my young client. The school newspaper featured a column that dubbed her the Divine Bovine. And inside the men's room, someone scrawled in graffiti, "Let her in, then F her to death." As her lawyer, I also drew fire. During one deposition, I recall an older South Carolina attorney interrupting me to say, "You are not a lady." I refused to apologize and instead replied, "I am a litigator, and if you don't like it, you are welcome to leave." The more I learned about the Citadel, the more I realized that the exclusion of women was not just about mistaken beliefs about gender. The exclusion of women was the defining feature of the institution, one which the Citadel celebrated. The mission of the school was to create the whole man, and inside the gates, a number of practices and rituals had constructed Citadel cadets as male and masculine, defined in opposition to women. One of its graduates, a prominent alumni, testified that the worst thing you could call a Citadel cadet was a woman, though that term was rarely used. Instead, more derogatory or vulgar words were used. Every minute of every hour of every day, he was there to punish men who did not live up to what they thought a Citadel cadet was. In the absence of women, the system fostered hostility and violence toward women and those men who didn't fit in. Commissions over the years had recorded physical hazing in the barracks, the direct result of this hypermasculine culture. The more I learned about the Citadel, the more I realized it would not be enough to simply admit women. The institution itself must change. In 1995, the federal court held that the Citadel's policy violated Shannon's right to equal protection under the Constitution. As the date of her admission drew near, the threats against her escalated. She received death threats. Her family's home was vandalized, and signs proliferated throughout Charleston opposing her admission. Outside the city, someone had taken a highway billboard and written, "Die Shannon." The federal judge called in the federal marshals to escort her onto campus. In August of 1995, Shannon became the first woman to join the Corps of Cadets. She was incredibly courageous, the only woman among 1,800 men, most of whom didn't want her there. Unfortunately, she withdrew a few days later. She had become ill and felt the need to protect herself from the stress and the threats. The day she left, Citadel cadets celebrated. They surfed the quad on mattresses, fists pumping, one wearing a t-shirt that read, "Absolutely male." A year later, the United States Supreme Court held that a similar program at the Virginia Military Institute could not exclude women. That was unconstitutional, the court held. The court acknowledged that some accommodations for women would be required, but it did not consider them to be material. This was a major victory for women, and we celebrated. And yet, having resisted the admission of women, these two state institutions also resisted any meaningful change to their traditions. When Shannon was about to be admitted, the Citadel asked permission to give her the same buzz haircut it gave male cadets. The Virginia Military Institute continued to call cadets brother rats, even when women were admitted. The women who entered these institutions were forced to try to fit in to the masculine traditions and cultures that existed. The story of the admission of women at the Citadel reminds us that the fight for gender equality is not over. Formal barriers have eroded, yet new challenges have emerged. It is not enough to simply open the doors for women. The face of institutions has changed as women have entered. Yet inside institutions, gender remains. To fully integrate women, institutions must change. They must transform. In order to fully include women, institutions need to consider how to include women. Acceptance must give rise to inclusion. Institutions need to rethink those policies and practices that exist to determine whether they negatively affect women. And if so, they need to change. So what would this look like in practice? Well, every institution is different, and there are many ways to be inclusive. For workplaces, there are a number of steps that can be taken as a start. First, workplaces must support pregnancy and caregiving. Many women are not just workers, but are family members. So are men. Institutions, workplaces need to provide paid parental and caretaking leave. They need to subsidize daycare, and they need to think about flexible scheduling, like part-time work. And they need to do this for both men and women. Second, eliminate unconscious bias. Workplaces need to train workers to recognize the unconscious gendered assumptions that influence performance evaluations or decisions about promotion and compensation. Third, monitor and enforce accountability. Rooting out bias is not easy, and it takes a long time. Fairness requires vigilance. So overall, institutions need to change. 24 years ago, the Citadel admitted women to its Corps of Cadets. Last year, it finally changed its haircut requirements for men and for women. It appointed a female cadet as its regimental commander, the top cadet. She graduated in May. Change is never easy, yet we cannot afford to ignore it. We must demand that institutions begin to value women as much as they have valued men, to value every person or member, no matter their gender. Thank you.